2 weeks without food. The Duke's daughter, Georgiana, was fading away, her spirit crushed, her body wasting until the new nanny stepped in. Could she do what no one else had? Could she save the child from the brink of death? The impossible happened next, but what did it cost? Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this historic romantic tale, I'd be so grateful for a like or a subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. Chapter 1. The Weight of Silence. Lady Georgiana Harrow sat perfectly still in the window seat of her bedchamber, watching raindrops race down the glass. 1, 2, 3, she counted them the way Mama had taught her to count during storms. But Mama was not here to say, "Well done, my clever girl," anymore. Mama was in a box in the ground in the family chapel, beneath the cold earth where nothing grew but moss and silence. The servants whispered that Mama was at peace now. Georgiana did not understand this. Peace was warm, like sitting by the fire with a book, or being wrapped in Mama's arms, or the feeling of sunshine on her face in the rose garden. The ground was cold. How could Mama be at peace in the cold? The breakfast tray sat untouched on the table behind her. Cook had made porridge with cream and honey, Georgiana's favorite, but favorites did not matter anymore. Nothing mattered anymore. Food tasted like ash when she tried to swallow it. Her stomach had closed up like a fist, refusing everything. She was not trying to starve herself. She simply could not remember why she should eat. What was the point of eating when Mama would never make breakfast on Sunday mornings again, getting the eggs all wrong and laughing about it? 3 weeks ago, Mama had been teaching her to embroider a handkerchief with violet flowers. Georgiana could still remember the feeling of sitting beside her mother in the drawing room, the afternoon light streaming through the windows, turning Mama's dark hair to burnished copper. Mama's hands had smelled of the rose water she used every morning, and she had hummed while she worked always the same melody, a folk song from her childhood in Cornwall. She had a habit of tucking her dark hair behind her left ear when she concentrated, revealing the small mole just below her earlobe that Georgiana used to kiss when she was little. "Patience, darling," Mama had said when Georgiana's stitches went crooked. "Beautiful things cannot be rushed." The next day, Mama had taken to her bed with fever. 5 days later, she was gone. Georgiana closed her eyes and tried to remember the melody Mama used to hum, but it was already fading, slipping away like smoke through her fingers. This terrified her more than the hunger, more than the hollow ache in her chest. What if she forgot? What if Mama's voice disappeared completely from her memory? What if, someday, she could not remember what her mother looked like when she smiled? A soft knock sounded at the door. Georgiana did not turn. "Lady Georgiana?" Sarah's voice, young and uncertain. "I've brought your supper, my lady." Georgiana said nothing. She heard the tray being set down, the clink of silver against porcelain. "Please eat, Lady Georgiana. Just a bite. For your Mama's sake. For Mama's sake." The words pierced something in Georgiana's chest. Mama was gone. Nothing done was for her sake anymore. Everything was meaningless. She turned her face to the wall and waited for Sarah to leave. Lord Thomas Harrow, Duke of Blackmore, stood outside his daughter's door, his hand raised to knock, unable to make himself do it. He was a tall man of 41 years, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvering at the temples and grey eyes that had once held warmth. Now they were as cold as the Yorkshire moors in winter. He could hear nothing from within, no crying, no movement, just silence. That terrible, suffocating silence that had filled Blackmore Castle since Catherine died. His hand fell to his side. He could not face his daughter, could not bear to see the accusation in her eyes, the question she did not need to speak aloud. "Why did you let Mama die?" He turned and walked back down the corridor, his footsteps echoing on the stone floors. The castle had never felt so vast, so empty. Every room held memories of Catherine, her laugh echoing in the halls, her music filling the drawing room, her warmth making even these cold stone walls feel like home. In his study, Dr. Thornbury waited, his medical bag at his feet, his expression grave. "Well?" Thomas demanded, though he already knew the answer from the physician's face. "Your Grace, I must be frank. Lady Georgiana has lost nearly a stone in weight. Her pulse is weak, her colour poor. If she does not begin to take nourishment soon, she will not survive." Thomas gripped the edge of his desk. "There must be something that can be done. Medicine, treatment, something." "Your Grace, I have seen this before in cases of extreme melancholia. The child has lost the will to live. This is not a disease of the body that I can treat with medicine. This is a disease of the heart. Then what can be done? Thomas heard the desperation in his own voice and hated it. Dr. Thornbury shook his head slowly. Love, Your Grace, though I confess I do not know how to prescribe it. After the physician left, Thomas sank into his chair and stared at the portrait above the fireplace. Catherine smiled down at him, her dark eyes full of life and mischief. They had married for duty, an arrangement between families, his title and wealth for her family's connections, but they had found unexpected companionship. Catherine had been the only person who could make him laugh, who teased him about his seriousness, who taught him that warmth was not weakness. On cold mornings, she would bring him tea in his study and read aloud from the newspaper, adding her own irreverent commentary that made him forget his responsibilities for a blessed few minutes. She called him Thomas even when the servants were present, scandalizing the staff and delighting him. She had wanted more children, but after Georgiana's difficult birth, the doctors said it was too dangerous. Then we shall pour all our love into this one remarkable girl, she had said, cradling their newborn daughter. She will have enough love for 10 children. But now Catherine was gone, and that love had died with her, and Georgiana was fading like a flower cut from its stem. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Enter. Mrs. Pembroke stepped inside, her face drawn with worry. She was a sturdy woman of 50, who had served at Blackmore for 30 years, who had loved the Duchess dearly. Thomas knew she wept silently in the linen closet when she thought no one could hear. Your Grace, I'm afraid Miss Hartley has given notice. She says she cannot bear to watch the child waste away any longer. Another failure. Another person abandoning Georgiana when she needed help most. Very well. See that she is paid through the month. Mrs. Pembroke hesitated. Your Grace, if I may speak plainly. Thomas gestured for her to continue. The child needs someone who understands grief. Miss Hartley is a good woman, but she's never known real loss. She doesn't know what to do with Lady Georgiana's pain. Perhaps a younger governess, someone less rigid in her methods. Before Thomas could respond, another knock sounded. Mr. Davies, the butler, entered without waiting for permission, highly irregular. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but Mrs. Davies insists on speaking with you. Cook appeared in the doorway, her round face red and her flour-dusted hands twisting in her apron. Thomas had never seen her outside the kitchen in all the years she had served his household. Your Grace, she said, her voice breaking, that little lamb is dying. I've made every dish she's ever loved, her favorite porridge, apple tarts, roast chicken with gravy, and she won't touch a morsel. The Duchess would be heartbroken to see her child like this. Thomas winced at the mention of his wife. He had not spoken Catherine's name aloud since the funeral, could not bear to hear it, to acknowledge that she was truly gone. I am doing everything I can, Mrs. Davies. With respect, Your Grace, you're not. You're hiding in this study while your daughter dies upstairs. The Duchess wouldn't have stood for it. The words hit like a physical blow. Mrs. Davies seemed to realize she had overstepped, but she lifted her chin defiantly. Someone has to say it, Your Grace. After they left, Thomas sat in the gathering darkness and faced the truth he had been avoiding. He was failing his daughter, failing Catherine's memory, failing everyone. He pulled out a sheet of paper and began writing letters to every placement agency in England. Somewhere, there had to be someone who could reach Georgiana, someone who could save her when he could not. Night fell over Blackmore Castle like a shroud. In her chamber, Georgiana lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sarah had brought supper hours ago, soup and bread, but it remained untouched. Georgiana closed her eyes and tried to remember Mama's humming, but the melody would not come. She tried to remember the exact shade of Mama's eyes, the precise sound of her laugh, the way her hand felt when she stroked Georgiana's hair before bed. But the memories were fading, becoming indistinct, like a painting left too long in the sun. This was the worst part. Worse than the grief, worse than the emptiness, the forgetting. Mama, please don't leave me completely, she thought into the darkness. Please let me remember. But the darkness offered no answer. In his study, Thomas read by candlelight, reviewing responses from placement agencies. Most were standard references, older women with impeccable credentials and rigid methods. Nothing that would help Georgiana. Then he opened a letter that made him pause. Your Grace, I write regarding the position of governess to Lady Georgiana. I am perhaps not the candidate you envisioned. I am young, and my methods are unconventional, but I understand what it means to lose a mother too soon. I was 7 when mine died, and for a time, I too forgot how to live. I do not promise miracles, but I promise I will not abandon your daughter to her grief. If you are willing to trust me, I will come at once. Miss Eleanor Westbrook. Thomas read it 3 times. There were no elaborate credentials, no list of accomplishments, no flattery. Just honesty. Raw, simple honesty. I too forgot how to live. Someone who understood. Someone who had survived what Georgiana was enduring. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote quickly, before he could doubt himself. Miss Westbrook, come tomorrow, please. He sealed the letter, rang for Mr. Davies, and sent it by express rider. Then he climbed the stairs to Georgiana's room, stood outside her door, and finally knocked. Georgiana, may I come in? Silence. He opened the door anyway. His daughter lay in bed, so thin she barely made an impression beneath the blankets. Her blonde hair spread across the pillow like spilled gold. I have found someone who might help, he said quietly. Someone who understands. Georgiana did not respond, did not even turn her head. Thomas approached the bed, sat gently on its edge. He wanted to take her hand, to hold her, to promise that everything would be all right. But he could not lie to his daughter. I am sorry, he whispered. I am sorry I have not known how to help you. I am sorry I have been a coward. But I am trying, Georgiana. I am trying. Still, she did not move. Thomas left the room with a heavy heart, closing the door softly behind him. In her bed, Georgiana blinked once, twice. A single tear slid down her cheek and disappeared into the pillow. She had heard him. Chapter 2. The Woman Who Understood Sorrow. Eleanor Westbrook stepped down from the mail coach onto the gravel drive of Blackmore Castle, her worn carpet bag clutched in one gloved hand. She was a slender woman of 24 years, of medium height, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple chignon and hazel eyes that had seen more than their years should hold. Her grey wool travelling dress was serviceable, not fashionable, the dress of a woman who had learned long ago that practicality mattered more than beauty. The castle loomed before her, all Gothic towers and narrow windows, dark stone against a grey October sky. It looked less like a home and more like a monument to something long dead. The very air around it seemed heavy with grief. Eleanor had known houses like this before, houses where sorrow had settled into the walls like damp, where every room echoed with absence. She had lived in one after her mother died, when the vicarage that had once been filled with warmth became a cold shell of what it had been. Her mother had died of consumption when Eleanor was 7 years old. She could still remember the sound of her mother's cough, the way it rattled in her chest like stones in a tin. She remembered holding her mother's hand as the life drained from her, remembered the exact moment when the labored breathing stopped and the terrible silence began. Her father, a country parson with more faith than feeling, had remarried within a year to a practical woman who had no use for a grieving stepdaughter. Eleanor had been sent to live with her mother's sister, Aunt Judith, a cold woman who ran a girls' school in Bath. Eleanor had grown up among other people's daughters, teaching herself to be useful, to be quiet, to need nothing. She became a teacher at 17, a governess at 20. In 7 years, she had served in 4 households. She was good at her work, patient, educated, kind, but she had never stayed anywhere long. She did not allow herself to become attached. Attachment led to loss, and she had had enough loss for one lifetime. But something in the Duke's letter had pierced her armor, the desperation beneath the formal language, the way he had written without euphemism, without false hope. She knew what it meant to want to die when you were too young to even understand death. She had been there herself, once. The great door opened, and a woman emerged, sturdy, grey-haired, with sharp eyes that assessed Eleanor in a single glance. "Miss Westbrook, I'm Mrs. Pembroke," the housekeeper. "Mrs. Pembroke," Eleanor inclined her head. "You're younger than I expected, miss." "I'm older than I look, Mrs. Pembroke." A slight smile touched the housekeeper's lips. "We shall see. His Grace is waiting for you in the study. This way." Eleanor followed her through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, through rooms shrouded in holland covers, past windows that looked out onto gardens gone to seed. The castle felt like a place holding its breath, waiting for something, perhaps for death, to finish what it had started. Mrs. Pembroke stopped outside a heavy oak door and knocked. "Enter," came a man's voice from within. The study was lined with books and smelled of leather and pipe tobacco. A fire burned in the grate, but it did nothing to warm the chill in the room. The Duke stood when Eleanor entered, tall, broad-shouldered, proper, formal. He was handsome in the way of men who did not notice their own looks, with dark hair silvering at the temples and an austerity that spoke of rigid self-control. But Eleanor could see the grief in the tight set of his jaw, the shadows beneath his grey eyes, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. This was a man barely holding himself together. "Miss Westbrook, thank you for coming so quickly." "Your Grace," she curtsied, then met his eyes directly. He gestured to a chair, but neither of them sat. He seemed too restless for sitting, too desperate for formality. "My daughter has not eaten in 14 days, Miss Westbrook. Dr. Thornbury says if she does not begin to take nourishment soon, she will not survive. I have tried everything, bribery, pleading, threats. Nothing reaches her. She sits in her room and stares at nothing. She barely speaks. It is as if," his voice broke slightly, "as if she has decided to follow her mother into death." Eleanor nodded slowly, taking this in. Then she asked a question he clearly did not expect. "What did your wife smell like, Your Grace?" He blinked. "I beg your pardon? Your wife? What did she smell like? What scent did she wear?" "Rosewater," he said after a moment. "Every morning. And sometimes lavender from the garden." "What did she and Georgiana do together each day?" The Duke's expression softened slightly. "They read together every afternoon in the library. They walked in the rose garden when the weather permitted. They embroidered by the fire in the evenings." "How did your wife die, Your Grace? I mean the specifics. What did Georgiana witness?" His jaw tightened. "She had a fever. The doctors could do nothing. It took her in 5 days. Georgiana was in the room when Catherine drew her last breath. She was holding her mother's hand. Did Georgiana say goodbye?" "Yes." But Catherine was unconscious by then, could not respond. Eleanor absorbed this, understanding the particular cruelty of it, a goodbye offered into silence, never acknowledged, never returned. "One more question, Your Grace. Have you wept for your wife?" The Duke stiffened, his eyes going cold. "I fail to see how that is relevant to my daughter's care." Eleanor met his gaze steadily, unflinching. "Georgiana is watching you to learn how to survive this. If you show her that grief must be hidden, she will hide hers so deep she suffocates on it." A long, tense silence filled the study. The Duke turned away, staring into the fire. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. "What would you need from me, Miss Westbrook? Freedom to be unconventional, permission to fail, your trust that I will not harm your daughter, even when my methods seem strange." She hesitated, then continued, "And I need you to grieve, Your Grace, properly. Your daughter needs to see that sorrow does not destroy us, that tears are not weakness, that her mother's death is worth mourning openly." The Duke was silent for a long moment. Eleanor could see the struggle in his face, the part of him that wanted to dismiss this impertinent young woman, and the part that was drowning, desperate enough to grasp at any lifeline. "You have freedom to do whatever you think best for Georgiana," he said finally. "I will. Consider what you have said about myself. It was not agreement, but it was not refusal either. Eleanor would take it. Thank you, Your Grace." He rang for Mrs. Pembroke. "Show Miss Westbrook to her room. Let her settle in before she sees Georgiana." As Eleanor followed the housekeeper up the stairs, Mrs. Pembroke spoke quietly. "The Duchess was a light in this house, miss. She had a laugh that could make even old Mr. Davies smile. She used to come to the kitchen and steal biscuits when she thought no one was looking, and she'd sit and chat with cook like they were old friends." Eleanor listened carefully, understanding that she was being given a gift. "She had no heirs, the Duchess," Mrs. Pembroke continued. "Born the daughter of an earl, but you'd never know it from the way she treated the staff. She loved that little girl more than life itself. Used to say Lady Georgiana was the best thing she'd ever done." They reached a small but comfortable chamber in the governess's wing. Mrs. Pembroke opened the door. "I hope you can help her, miss. That child is dying, and not one of us knows how to stop it." "I will do everything I can," Eleanor promised. After Mrs. Pembroke left, Eleanor unpacked her few belongings. Among them, a small bundle of letters from her own mother, written in the months before her death when she had still been able to hold a pen. A pressed violet from her mother's funeral, still holding a ghost of purple after 17 years. A miniature portrait of her mother that Eleanor had carried through 4 households and 7 years of governess positions. She touched each object gently, remembering. Her mother's handwriting, slanted and elegant. The smell of violets in the church, the way her mother had looked in the portrait, young, vibrant, alive. Eleanor looked at these remnants of her loss and made a silent promise. I will not let another child be destroyed by grief, not if I can help it. She closed her carpet bag, smoothed her skirt, and took a steadying breath. Then she climbed the stairs to the nursery wing, following Mrs. Pembroke's directions. Outside Georgiana's door, she paused. She could hear nothing from within, no crying, no movement, just silence. The same terrible silence that had filled her own childhood after her mother died. Eleanor knocked softly. No answer. She opened the door slowly and stepped inside. The child sat in the window seat, so thin she looked like a ghost, her blonde hair lank and uncombed, her pale blue eyes staring at nothing. She wore a white nightgown that hung on her frame like a shroud. She did not look at Eleanor, did not acknowledge her presence at all. Eleanor's heart clenched at the sight, but she kept her expression calm. She had learned long ago that children could sense pity, and pity was not what this girl needed. She crossed the room quietly, picked up a chair from beside the empty fireplace, and set it near, but not too near, the window seat. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and spoke in a gentle, steady voice. "Good afternoon, Lady Georgiana. My name is Eleanor. I have come to sit with you, if you will permit it. You do not need to speak to me, or look at me, or acknowledge me at all. I will simply be here." The child did not move, did not blink, just continued staring out the window at the grey October sky. Eleanor settled into her chair and waited. She was good at waiting. She had learned patience in the long years after her mother's death, when time had moved like honey and every day felt like an eternity. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against the window pane. Eleanor watched the raindrops race down the glass and thought of her own mother and the child who had once been too grief-stricken to live, and the woman she had become. She would wait as long as it took, and when Georgiana was ready, if she was ever ready, Eleanor would be there. Chapter 3. The Language of Grief, Another Governess. Georgiana watched from her window seat as the woman settled into the chair, arranging her skirts with quiet efficiency. This one was younger than Miss Hartley, with auburn hair and kind eyes and a voice that didn't try too hard to sound cheerful. Georgiana didn't care. She wanted them all to go away. She wanted everyone to stop looking at her with those sad, pitying faces. She wanted her mother. The new governess, Eleanor, she had said her name was, didn't try to make her eat, didn't try to make her talk. She just sat in the chair by the window and opened a small book. Then she began to read aloud. Not children's stories, poetry, sad poetry. She dwelt among the untrodden ways, Eleanor read, her voice soft and steady. Beside the springs of Dove, a maid whom there were none to praise and very few to love. Georgiana found herself listening despite herself. The words were about loss, about someone who died, and no one noticed. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged that sadness existed, that death was real, that it was acceptable to speak of it. Eleanor read for an hour, never asking for acknowledgement, never expecting response. When she finished, she closed the book and stood. "I will return tomorrow, Lady Georgiana," she said simply, and left. Georgiana stared at the closed door, confused. Why hadn't she tried to force her to eat? Why hadn't she lectured her about wasting away? Eleanor returned the next morning with her needlework. She sat in the same chair and worked in silence, occasionally reading a passage from her book, but mostly just sitting, her needle moving through fabric in steady, rhythmic pulls. The untouched breakfast tray sat on the table. Eleanor glanced at it once but said nothing. After an hour, she spoke, but not to Georgiana. She seemed to be speaking to herself, or perhaps to the air. "My mother died when I was 7. I remember her hands most clearly. She had a small scar on her right thumb from a gardening accident. I used to trace it with my finger while she read to me." Georgiana's head turned slightly. This woman lost her mother too? She was the first person who had mentioned understanding, not just sympathizing. Eleanor didn't press the topic. She simply returned to her needlework, humming softly. On the third day, Eleanor opened the windows. The cold November air rushed in, and a maid who was passing in the corridor started to protest. "Lady Georgiana's mother loved fresh air," Eleanor said firmly. "Did she not?" Mrs. Pembroke appeared in the doorway. "Every morning, Your Grace insisted on fresh air, even in winter, said it was good for the lungs and the spirit." The maid curtsied and withdrew. Georgiana turned her head toward the window, the first physical reaction she'd had in days. The cold air smelled like the garden, like mornings when Mama would throw open the windows and declare, "Stuffy air makes stuffy thoughts." A memory surfaced, vivid and painful. Mama laughing as Georgiana complained about the cold, wrapping her in a shawl and saying, "We are Yorkshire women, darling. We do not fear a bit of wind." Georgiana's eyes filled with tears for the first time in 2 weeks, but she didn't let them fall. She blinked them back and returned her gaze to the window. Eleanor saw but said nothing. She simply pulled her own shawl tighter and continued with her needlework. When Eleanor arrived on the 4th day, she carried small sachets of dried lavender. She placed them around the room on the windowsill, the bedside table, the mantelpiece. The scent filled the chamber, sweet and herbal. Georgiana's nose wrinkled slightly. Then she spoke for the first time, her voice hoarse from disuse, barely a whisper. "It doesn't smell like her." Eleanor didn't react with excitement or excessive emotion. She simply nodded and sat down in her usual chair. "No, nothing will ever smell exactly like her again. That is one of the cruelties of death. We lose even the small things. The scent, the sound of footsteps, the particular way a voice says your name." Georgiana stared at this woman who was saying all the things no one else would say. "Everyone says she's at peace," Georgiana whispered. "That she's in a better place, that I should be happy for her." Eleanor met her eyes directly. "That is what people say when they don't know what else to say. The truth is, she's gone, and you're here without her, and it's unbearable. There is no peace in that for you." Georgiana felt something crack inside her chest, a tiny fissure in the wall she'd built around her heart. Eleanor continued, her voice gentle but honest. "I do not think your mother is at peace, Lady Georgiana. I think if there is any consciousness after death, she is worried sick about you. She is watching her beloved daughter fade away, and she cannot help. That must be its own kind of torment." Georgiana's eyes widened. She hadn't thought of it that way. Mama, watching, unable to help, worried about her. The conversation ended there. Eleanor picked up her book and began to read, giving Georgiana space to think. "She had consumption," Eleanor said quietly on the 5th day, as if continuing a conversation from moments ago rather than yesterday. "It took months. By the end, she was so thin I could see every bone. She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. I held her hand when she died. I was certain I would die too, from the pain of it. But I didn't. The body continues even when the heart is shattered. I found that terribly unfair." Georgiana's voice was small. "Did you stop eating?" "No. But I stopped speaking for nearly 3 months. I had nothing to say. The world felt wrong, like a coat that didn't fit anymore." "How did you start speaking again?" Eleanor's needle paused in her embroidery. "My aunt, the woman I was sent to live with, she said something true. She said, 'Your mother gave you language. She taught you words. If you refuse to speak, you throw away her gift.' It was the first time anyone acknowledged that my mother had given me things that didn't die with her." Georgiana processed this slowly. Mama had taught her to read, to embroider, to count raindrops, to love stories. Were those gifts? Things that remained even though Mama was gone? On the 6th day, Eleanor asked, "May I brush your hair, Lady Georgiana? It must be uncomfortable, so tangled." Georgiana didn't answer for a long moment. Then she nodded, just once. Eleanor rose and fetched the silver brush from the dressing table. She began to work through the tangles gently, carefully, never pulling or hurting. As she brushed, she hummed unconsciously, a melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her memory. Georgiana gasped. "That song? How do you know that song?" Eleanor stopped, the brush suspended mid-stroke. "What song?" "The one you're humming." My mother hummed it. Always. When she was embroidering, when she was happy, when she was... Georgiana's voice broke. Eleanor looked surprised. "It's a Cornish folk song. My mother used to sing it. She was from Cornwall. So was my mother." A moment of connection passed between them, 2 mothers, 2 daughters, linked across death by a melody carried from the rocky shores of Cornwall to the cold moors of Yorkshire. Eleanor began to sing it softly, adding words Georgiana had never heard. "When the gorse blooms on the hillside and the seabirds call my name, I'll come home to thee, my darling, though the wind and rain may claim." Georgiana felt something inside her loosen. She leaned back against Eleanor slightly, the first physical trust she'd shown anyone in 2 weeks. Eleanor continued brushing and humming, and Georgiana closed her eyes, letting herself remember the sound of her mother's voice carrying that same melody. The Duke appeared in the doorway on the 7th day. He had been watching from afar all week, instructed by Eleanor not to interfere, but his resolve had weakened. He needed to see his daughter. What he saw made his heart contract painfully. Georgiana was leaning against Eleanor while the governess read aloud, the brush resting on the table beside them. Georgiana's hair neat and clean for the first time in weeks. His daughter looked almost peaceful. Eleanor noticed him and met his eyes. She gave a small nod, progress, but fragile. He withdrew silently, not wanting to disturb the moment. After he left, Georgiana asked quietly, "Will you leave me when I'm better?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Do you want me to stay?" "Yes." "Then I will stay as long as you need me, Lady Georgiana. I promise you that." Georgiana was silent for a moment, then tested. "Everyone leaves eventually. Papa left. He used to come read to me every night, but he stopped after Mama died. He doesn't even look at me anymore." Eleanor's heart broke for both of them. "Your father hasn't left you, darling. He's drowning in his own grief and doesn't know how to swim. Sometimes adults are very foolish about feelings. We think we must be strong, so we pretend we don't hurt. But the hurt doesn't go away just because we hide it. Will Papa be all right? I don't know, but I hope so. He loves you very much." "How do you know?" "Because when he speaks about you, his hands shake. People's hands only shake about things that matter more than anything." That evening, Eleanor went down to the kitchen to make Georgiana chamomile tea, something mild and soothing to help her sleep. Cook watched her with tears streaming down her round face. "She spoke to you, didn't she, miss?" Mrs. Pembroke said she heard the child's voice. "She did. Small words, but words nonetheless. Will she eat, do you think?" Eleanor measured tea leaves carefully into the pot. "I don't know, but she's beginning to remember what it's like to be alive. That's the first step." As Eleanor climbed the stairs back to Georgiana's room, she saw the Duke standing in the hallway shadows. He didn't speak, but his eyes asked the question his voice could not. "She is coming back to us, Your Grace," Eleanor said quietly, slowly, like someone waking from a very long sleep. The Duke's voice was rough with emotion. "Thank you." Eleanor inclined her head and continued to Georgiana's room, where the child waited for her tea, for her stories, for the steady presence that said, "You are not alone in this. I understand. It is all right to hurt." Chapter 4. The Duke's Hidden Grief. Thomas stood in the doorway of the Duchess's chambers, his hand resting on the frame, unable to cross the threshold. He had not entered since the day of her death. The room remained exactly as Catherine had left it, her ivory dressing gown draped over the chair by the window, her silver hairbrush on the vanity with strands of her dark hair still caught in the bristles, her book stacked on the bedside table with a ribbon marking her place in a novel she would never finish. The servants had asked repeatedly if they should pack her things away. He had told them no, but he didn't know why. Perhaps because packing them away would make it final, perhaps because he was a coward. He closed the door without entering and walked away. November 6th, late evening. Eleanor's nightly report to the Duke had become a ritual. They met in his study after Georgiana was asleep, the fire crackling in the grate, the curtains drawn against the November cold. Tonight, Eleanor sat in the chair across from his desk and spoke without preamble. "Georgiana asked about you today. She wanted to know why you don't visit her anymore." Thomas flinched as if she'd struck him. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that you are grieving and don't know how to show it. That you love her but are afraid." "Afraid?" He bristled, his back straightening. "I am not, Your Grace." Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm, cutting through his protest. "I do not question your courage in matters of estate or duty, but grief requires a different kind of bravery, and I think you are terrified of it." A long silence filled the study. The fire popped and hissed. Finally, Eleanor asked, "When is the last time you visited your wife's grave?" "The day of the funeral." "Why?" Thomas opened his mouth, closed it, started again. "I don't know what to say to her." Eleanor sat down in the chair opposite him without being invited, a shocking breach of protocol, but she seemed not to notice or care. "Your Grace, may I tell you what I see?" He said nothing, but he didn't dismiss her either. "I see a man who is carrying the weight of a dukedom, a household, an estate, and a devastating loss, and he believes he must carry it all alone. I see a man who was taught that emotion is weakness, that tears are unmanly, that a nobleman must be stoic above all. But I also see a man whose daughter is watching him, learning from him. And what she is learning is that when someone you love dies, you lock away your heart and never speak their name again." Thomas's hands gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned white. "You overstep, Miss Westbrook." "Yes, I do, but someone must." Unable to sleep, Thomas walked the halls of Blackmore Castle in the small hours of the morning. The portraits of his ancestors watched him from the walls, generations of Harrow men, all stern-faced, all proper, all dead. He thought back to his own childhood. His mother had died when he was 15. Consumption, like Eleanor's mother, though it had taken her quickly only 3 months from diagnosis to death. He remembered his father standing beside him at the funeral, tall and rigid as iron. "You are the heir," the old duke had said, his voice cold as the stone chapel around them. "Harrow men do not weep, we endure. Your mother would expect you to be strong." Thomas had locked his grief away. As instructed, he had been strong, he had endured. When he'd married Catherine 12 years ago, it had been an arrangement, his title and wealth for her family's connections. He had expected a cordial partnership, nothing more. But Catherine had been different, warm where his world was cold. She laughed at his seriousness, teased him about his rigid formality, slowly coaxed him into feeling again. He remembered their wedding night. They had both been nervous, awkward with each other, but instead of consummating the marriage immediately, they had sat up talking until dawn, sharing stories about their childhoods, their hopes, their fears. She had made him laugh, truly laugh, for the first time in years. Over their marriage, she had taught him it was safe to feel, safe to love. When Georgiana was born after a long and difficult labor that had nearly killed Catherine, she had placed the tiny, squalling baby in his arms. "Now you must learn to love with your whole heart, Thomas," she had said, exhausted but radiant. "No more half measures." And he had. Heaven help him, he had. Her death had not been sudden. She had fallen ill with a fever the doctors couldn't cure. For 8 days, he had sat by her bedside, watching her grow weaker, more delirious. On the final day, when she could barely speak, she had whispered, "Take care of our girl. Don't let her forget me. And Thomas, don't forget how to live." "You're not dying," he had said, desperate, refusing to accept it. "You'll recover. You must." But she had smiled sadly and squeezed his hand with what little strength remained. "Promise me." "I promise." She had died 3 hours later, Georgiana holding one hand, Thomas holding the other. Since then, he had broken his promise. He had let grief turn him to stone, just as his father had taught him. He had forgotten how to live. During their evening meeting, Eleanor said, "Georgiana needs to see you grieve, Your Grace, not to burden her with your pain, but to show her that it's human, that her father is not made of ice." Thomas stared into his brandy glass. "I don't know how," he admitted, and it cost him dearly to say it. "Then perhaps you might start small. Visit your wife's grave with Georgiana. Speak her name, Catherine. Say it aloud." He hadn't said her name since the funeral. It felt forbidden, like a word that would shatter him if he gave it voice. "Catherine," he whispered, and his voice broke on the word. Eleanor waited, patient and steady. "Catherine," he said again, and this time tears sprang to his eyes. He blinked them back furiously. "Your Grace, there is no one here but me. You are allowed to cry. If I start, I fear I will never stop." Eleanor's voice was soft. "Then let it consume you for a time. Grief is not the enemy. The refusal to grieve is what poisons us. It poisoned my aunt, who never mourned my mother properly. It poisoned me until I learned to let myself feel, and it is poisoning you now." Eleanor suggested the Duke spend time with Georgiana, not trying to fix her, not avoiding the topic of Catherine, but simply being present as a fellow mourner. Thomas was terrified, but he agreed. He entered Georgiana's room in the afternoon. Eleanor had discreetly absented herself. Father and daughter stared at each other like strangers connected by blood and loss. Georgiana spoke first, her voice small. "Papa, do you miss her?" His throat closed. He forced the words out. "Every moment of every day. Why don't you cry? Everyone else does. Cook cries. Mrs. Pembroke cries. I cry now, but I've never seen you cry." He sat down heavily in the chair Eleanor usually occupied. "I don't know how anymore. Mama said you used to be different. Before you became Duke. She said your papa made you hard." Thomas was shocked Catherine had told their daughter this. "She said that?" "She said you had a soft heart under the hard outside, like a walnut, and that I should remember that, if you ever seemed cold." Something cracked inside his chest, a fissure in the wall he'd built around his heart. "Your mother was the wisest person I've ever known. I miss her, Papa. So much it hurts, like something is broken inside me." "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, exactly like that." For the first time since the funeral, father and daughter were truly honest with each other. Georgiana's eyes filled with tears. "Will you come visit me more? Miss Westbrook says you love me, but I forget sometimes." The words pierced him. "I will come every day, I promise. I'm sorry I left you alone, Georgiana. I am, drowning in my own grief, and I thought I was protecting you by staying away. But I was wrong. Georgiana climbed down from the window seat and crossed the room. She climbed into his lap, something she hadn't done in weeks, and wrapped her thin arms around his neck. The Duke held his daughter and finally, allowed himself to weep. Great, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. She cried too, and they held each other in their shared sorrow, no longer alone in their grief. In the hallway, Eleanor stood with her back against the wall, tears streaming down her own face. She had not meant to eavesdrop, but she could not make herself leave. She had needed to know that father and daughter would find their way back to each other. The Duke found Eleanor in the library, where she sat reading by the window in the grey afternoon light. "You were right," he said without preamble, "about everything. I was hiding from my grief, and in doing so, I abandoned my daughter when she needed me most. You are here now, Your Grace. That is what matters." He really looked at her for the first time since she had arrived. She was not beautiful in the classical sense, but there was something luminous about her, a strength, a grace, an understanding that went soul deep. The afternoon light caught in her auburn hair, turning it to copper and gold. "How did you become so wise, Miss Westbrook? You are young yet. Suffering is an excellent teacher, Your Grace. I would trade all my wisdom for one more day with my mother, but we don't get such choices." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, a connection that went deeper than words. Thomas realized, with a shock that ran through him like lightning, that he was drawn to this woman in ways that went far beyond gratitude. He immediately suppressed the feeling. It was too soon, too inappropriate. She was his employee. Catherine had been dead barely a month. The very thought felt like a betrayal, but the seed was planted, whether he wanted it or not. That night, Thomas did something he had not done in weeks. He went to Catherine's chambers, crossed the threshold he had been unable to cross, and sat in the chair by her bed. "I'm sorry, my darling," he said aloud to the empty room. "I've been a coward, but I'm trying to be brave now. For Georgiana, for myself. I wish you were here. I wish. Catherine, I miss you." He wept until he was empty, until there were no more tears. And when he finally left the room, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. The grief was still there, it would always be there, but it no longer crushed him beneath its weight. As he walked back to his chambers, he passed Eleanor's door and heard soft crying from within. He paused, his hand raised to knock, to offer comfort as she had comforted him, but he stopped himself. She was entitled to her privacy, to her own grief. He continued on, but the sound of her tears haunted him. A realization struck him. She was healing them all, but who healed her? Chapter 5. The storm breaks. Eleanor woke on the morning of November 15th with a sense of anticipation mixed with dread. For 3 weeks, she had been coaxing Georgiana back to life with infinite patience. The child had been drinking broth, taking tea, even eating small amounts of bread, but she had not yet eaten a full meal. Eleanor knew that Georgiana's body was slowly recovering, but her spirit was still fractured. True healing required more than just physical nourishment. It required confronting the rage that lived beneath the sorrow rage that Georgiana had been holding in since her mother's death. That rage would come out eventually. Eleanor only hoped she would be strong enough to weather the storm when it did. November 15th. Morning. Eleanor prepared a proper breakfast for Georgiana. Soft scrambled eggs, toast with butter and jam, fresh berries glistening with dew from the kitchen garden, warm milk in a porcelain cup. She arranged it beautifully on a tray and carried it up to the nursery. Georgiana was awake, sitting in her usual spot by the window. She looked stronger than she had a month ago. There was color in her cheeks now, and her eyes were clearer. But she was still frail, still carrying the weight of her grief like a stone around her neck. "Good morning, dear heart. I've brought breakfast." Georgiana looked at the tray. Her face went pale. "I'm not hungry. I know. But your body needs nourishment. Perhaps just the toast?" Georgiana's hands began to tremble. She stared at the food, and something dark crossed her face, something Eleanor had been waiting to see. "Georgiana, what is it?" "Mama used to make me breakfast." Georgiana's voice was thin, stretched tight. "On Sundays, she'd send cook away and make eggs herself. She'd get them all wrong, too runny or too hard, but she'd laugh and say, 'Perfection is overrated,' and we'd eat them together and pretend they were delicious." Eleanor's heart ached. What a lovely memory. "It's not lovely." Georgiana's voice rose, cracking like glass under pressure. "It hurts." Every memory hurts, and I hate it. I know, darling, I know. You don't know, Georgiana screamed, and suddenly she was on her feet, her whole body shaking. Everyone says they know, but you don't. Your mother died when you were 7. You barely remember her. I remember everything, every single thing, and it's torture. Before Eleanor could respond, Georgiana swept the breakfast tray off the table with violent force. The crash was tremendous. Food, dishes, silverware flew through the air and crashed to the floor. The plate shattered into a dozen pieces. Eggs splattered across the carpet like something obscene. Milk pooled and soaked into the rug. The cup rolled under the bed, miraculously unbroken. Georgiana was screaming now, words pouring out of her like poison that had been festering for a month. I hate this. I hate eating. I hate waking up. I hate that she's gone. Why did she leave me? Why did heaven take her? What did I do wrong? Everyone says she's in heaven, that she's happy, that she's at peace. But what about me? What about Papa? Are we supposed to be happy that she's gone? I want her back. I want my mother. She collapsed to the floor, beating her small fists against the carpet, sobbing uncontrollably. Her voice was raw, animal, a sound of pure anguish that seemed too large to come from such a small body. Servants rushed to the door. Sarah appeared first, her young face white with shock. Mrs. Pembroke was right behind her, and Mr. Davies hurried up the stairs with surprising speed for a man of his years. Eleanor held up a hand, stopping them at the threshold. Stay back, please. The Duke appeared, alarmed by the screaming. He pushed past the servants and started to enter the room. Eleanor caught his eye and shook her head slightly. Let this happen. She needs this. He froze in the doorway, every instinct screaming at him to protect his daughter, to stop her pain. But he trusted Eleanor. He stayed where he was, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Eleanor sat down on the floor beside Georgiana, not touching her, not restraining her, just present. She spoke quietly, steadily, through the storm of the child's rage. Yes, it is unfair. Yes, you should be angry. Yes, she should still be here. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. Her death is not your fault. You are allowed to be furious at heaven, at the world, at death itself. I am here. I will stay. You are safe. Georgiana screamed for 20 minutes. She cried until she was hoarse, until her body was limp with exhaustion, until there was nothing left inside her but emptiness. Her words became less coherent, more primal, dissolving into pure sound. Mama, Mama, please come back, please. Finally, she crawled to Eleanor and collapsed into her lap, weeping softly now, all the rage spent. She was boneless, emptied, a vessel that had been poured out completely. Eleanor wrapped her arms around the child and rocked her gently, the way she imagined her own mother had rocked her when she was small. She hummed the Cornish folk song, the one both their mothers had sung, and felt Georgiana's breathing begin to slow and steady. The Duke watched from the doorway, tears streaming down his own face. This was the first time Georgiana had truly grieved, the first time she had allowed the full force of her pain to break free, and Eleanor held her through all of it, steady and strong as stone. After an hour, Georgiana's sobs quieted to hiccups, then to shuddering breaths. Eleanor stroked her hair and whispered, "You are so brave, my darling, so very brave." "I don't feel brave." Georgiana's voice was raw, damaged from screaming. "I feel empty. That is what happens when you release poison. It leaves a hollow space. But hollow spaces can be filled again, with time, with new things. You will never stop missing your mother, but the pain will not always be this sharp." Georgiana pulled back slightly to look at Eleanor's face. "I'm sorry I broke the dishes. Dishes can be replaced. What matters is that you let yourself feel what you've been holding inside." The Duke finally entered the room, stepping carefully over the broken porcelain. He knelt beside his daughter, his grey eyes red-rimmed. "Georgiana, I'm so sorry. I should have told you it was all right to be angry. I was angry too. I still am." Georgiana looked up at her father with swollen eyes. "You are? Furious. At heaven, at fate, at the unfairness of losing someone so precious. Your mother should be here. You're right to be angry that she's not." This validation from her father, the man who never showed emotion, seemed to reach something deep in Georgiana. She reached for him with trembling arms, and he gathered her against his chest, holding her as if she were made of glass. Eleanor quietly stood and moved toward the door, giving them privacy. As she stepped into the hallway, she heard Georgiana say, "Papa, will you tell me about Mama? The real things, not just, she was wonderful. I want to remember her as a person. The Duke's voice cracked. Yes, yes, I'll tell you everything. Eleanor closed the door softly and leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. Mrs. Pembroke appeared at her elbow with a handkerchief. That was well done, miss, the housekeeper said quietly. Eleanor wiped her eyes. She needed to break before she could begin to heal. Like a bone that's been set wrong, sometimes it must be broken again to mend properly. Yes, exactly like that. November 16th. Recovery. The next morning, Eleanor brought a simple breakfast. Porridge with honey, nothing more. She half expected resistance, but when she entered the nursery, Georgiana was sitting up in bed, looking small but somehow more present than before. Georgiana looked at the bowl and said quietly, "I'm hungry." Eleanor tried not to show her elation. She set the tray on Georgiana's lap with steady hands. "Then let's see if you can eat a few bites." Georgiana picked up the spoon with trembling fingers. She took one spoonful, then another, then 3, 4, 5. Her hands shook, and tears streamed down her face as she ate, but she continued. The porridge was warm and sweet, and she ate it slowly, deliberately, as if learning how to do something she'd forgotten. "It tastes like food again," she whispered. "For weeks, everything tasted like nothing. But now, I can taste the honey." Eleanor had to look away to hide her own tears. After eating half the bowl, Georgiana set down the spoon. "That's all I can manage. You did beautifully." November 17th. The Duke joins them. Eleanor suggested the Duke take breakfast with Georgiana. He was hesitant. Would his presence make her refuse food again? But when he entered the nursery with his own tray, Georgiana smiled. It was tentative, fragile as spun glass, but it was a real smile. "Good morning, Papa." "Good morning, my darling girl." They ate together awkwardly at first, the silence broken only by the clink of silverware against porcelain. Then, slowly, they began to talk. The Duke told stories about Catherine that Georgiana had never heard. Her terrible singing voice, how she couldn't carry a tune to save her life but sang anyway because it made her happy. Her habit of reading the endings of books first, which had driven him mad. The time she'd fallen into the fish pond trying to rescue a frog, emerging covered in pondweed and laughing so hard she could barely breathe. Georgiana laughed a sound Eleanor hadn't heard in the entire month she'd been at Blackmore. It was a fragile laugh, breaking like sunlight through clouds, but it was there, real and alive. The Duke looked at Eleanor with such profound gratitude that she had to look away, her chest tight with emotion she couldn't name. November 18th. Eleanor's private moment. That evening, Eleanor escaped to the conservatory, a glass-roofed room filled with plants that the Duchess had loved. Ferns hung from the ceiling in woven baskets. Orchids bloomed in shades of purple and white. The air was warm and humid, thick with the smell of earth and growing things. Eleanor sat on a stone bench among the greenery and allowed herself to cry. The emotional toll of the past month had been enormous. She had given everything she had to Georgiana, had held the child's pain as if it were her own, and in doing so, she had reopened wounds she thought had healed long ago. She thought of her own mother, of the little girl she had been, of the grief she had carried for 17 years like a stone in her pocket. She realized that in healing Georgiana, she had been healing herself. "Miss Westbrook, Eleanor, are you all right?" She looked up, startled. The Duke stood in the doorway of the conservatory, backlit by the lamplight from the corridor. He must have been looking for her to give his evening report on Georgiana. Eleanor quickly wiped her face. "Yes, Your Grace, forgive me. I'm simply tired." He entered the conservatory, closing the door behind him. "You have carried us all this past month. Please, let me. Is there anything I can do?" Their eyes met across the space between them, and something electric passed through the air. Eleanor felt it like lightning in her blood, the pull, the recognition, the dangerous warmth that had nothing to do with the humid air of the conservatory. She stood quickly. "I should retire. It's been a long day." "Eleanor." She fled before he could say more, before she could let herself feel what was building between them. She hurried through the corridors back to her small room in the governess's wing, her heart pounding against her ribs. Late that night, the Duke stood outside Eleanor's door, his hand raised to knock. He wanted to thank her properly, to tell her that she had saved his daughter's life, that she had saved his life too, in ways he was only beginning to understand. He wanted to tell her that he was starting to feel things for her that were entirely inappropriate, entirely impossible, and entirely undeniable. but he dropped his hand and walked away. In her room, Eleanor lay awake, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. She knew she was standing on the edge of something dangerous. She was developing feelings for a duke, a man so far above her station that even thinking of him as anything other than her employer was folly. But her heart didn't care about station or propriety or sense. She made a silent vow. She would bury these feelings. She would focus on Georgiana. She would not let herself want the impossible. But want, once acknowledged, is hard to dismiss. It lives in the body like hunger, like thirst, like the need for air. And Eleanor, lying alone in her narrow bed, knew that she was already lost. Chapter 6. Small victories and growing complications. Georgiana woke hungry. It was strange, this feeling she had forgotten what hunger felt like when it wasn't just an ache, but an actual desire for food. She could smell breakfast cooking somewhere in the house, bacon and fresh bread, and her stomach growled in response. When Eleanor brought her tray, Georgiana didn't hesitate. She ate everything: soft scrambled eggs, toast with butter, strawberry preserves, sliced apples. Eleanor watched with barely concealed joy, her hazel eyes bright with unshed tears. Georgiana felt proud of herself. She was eating for Mama now, she decided. Because Mama would want her to live. Mama would want her to be strong. Well done, dear heart, Eleanor said softly. Well done. November 20th to 25th. Over the following days, Georgiana began eating regular meals. The portions were still small, her stomach had shrunk from weeks of starvation, but she ate consistently. Slowly, gradually, her body began to heal. The dresses that had hung on her frame like sacks began to fit again. Color returned to her cheeks, pink and healthy. Her hair regained its luster, no longer lank and dull, but shining gold in the November light. On the 23rd, she asked to go outside for the first time in weeks. Eleanor bundled her in warm clothes, a wool coat, a thick shawl, leather gloves, and they walked in the garden. The November air was cold and sharp, but Georgiana breathed it in deeply, savoring the feeling of wind on her face. They walked to the rose garden, where her mother had spent so many hours. The bushes were bare now, thorny and skeletal, seemingly dead. Georgiana stopped before one and touched a branch gently. Will they bloom again? Eleanor stood beside her, her own shawl pulled tight against the cold. Yes, in spring, they'll come back. They look dead now, but they're only sleeping, gathering strength for when the sun returns. Georgiana understood the metaphor. Like me. Like all of us, darling. From his study window, the Duke watched them, two figures in the grey garden, the woman and the child, heads bent together in conversation. His heart felt fuller than it had in months. The Duke began joining Georgiana for breakfast every morning. It became a ritual, the three of them, father, daughter, and governess sitting together in the morning room as pale winter sunlight filtered through the windows. In the afternoons, he read to Georgiana from the books Catherine had loved. Poetry, mostly, and novels with happy endings. Georgiana would curl up in the chair by the fire, listening to her father's deep voice bringing the words to life. One day, she asked him, "Papa, how did you and Mama fall in love?" The Duke hesitated, the book closing in his hands. Then he set it aside and told her the story. The arranged marriage, the awkward beginning, the gradual friendship that had blossomed into something deeper. "I didn't expect to love her," he admitted, "but she made it impossible not to. She was like sunshine breaking into a cold, dark room. She warmed everything she touched." Georgiana treasured these stories, collected them like precious jewels. Each one helped her remember her mother not as a ghost, but as a real woman who had lived and loved and laughed. Eleanor began to notice the way the Duke looked at her, not just with gratitude anymore, but with something warmer, more personal. His grey eyes would linger on her face when he thought she wasn't watching. His voice would soften when he spoke her name. During their evening reports, their conversations had begun to drift beyond Georgiana. He asked about her childhood, her dreams, her thoughts on literature and philosophy. She found herself lingering in his study, talking longer than necessary, the fire burning low while they discussed everything and nothing. One evening, as she rose to leave, his hand brushed hers as he reached for the same book on his desk. It seemed accidental, but the touch sent electricity through her entire body. She pulled back quickly, maintaining propriety, but her face flushed hot. "Forgive me," the Duke said, his own voice rougher than usual. "No harm done, Your Grace." She fled before she could say something foolish. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Eleanor admitted what she had been denying for weeks. She was falling in love with him, not with gratitude or admiration, but with real, dangerous, impossible love. But it was impossible. She was a governess. He was a duke. The gulf between them was as wide as the ocean. More than that, Georgiana needed her. Any romantic entanglement would compromise her position, would threaten the stability the child had only just regained. Eleanor would not risk that. She made a decision. She would be more careful, more distant, more professional. Eleanor began keeping their evening reports brief and formal. She stopped lingering in the study, stopped allowing their conversations to wander into personal territory. When the Duke sought her out in the library the next afternoon, she excused herself quickly, citing tasks that needed attending. The Duke noticed the change immediately. He was confused, then hurt. Had he offended her somehow? Had his touch been too forward? Did she suspect his growing feelings and find them unwelcome? Mrs. Pembroke noticed the tension like a bloodhound scenting prey. She cornered Eleanor in the linen closet on the 28th. "Begging your pardon, miss, but are you all right? You seem troubled." Eleanor, caught off guard by the housekeeper's directness, found herself admitting more than she intended. "I fear I've become too comfortable here. I must remember my place." "Mrs." Pembroke studied her with shrewd eyes. "His Grace is a good man, lonely, and you've brought life back to this house." "Mrs. Pembroke, please. I'm not suggesting anything improper, miss. Just don't punish yourself for caring. Caring is what makes you good at what you do." Eleanor had no answer for that. Georgiana noticed everything. Of course she did. The child was far too perceptive for comfort. "Why are you sad?" she asked Eleanor that afternoon as they worked on her embroidery. "And why is Papa sad? You were both happy before, and now you're not." Eleanor was startled. "What makes you think we're sad? You don't smile at each other anymore, and Papa looks at you when you're not looking, and he looks, I don't know, like he looks at Mama's portrait." Eleanor's heart clenched painfully. "Georgiana, sometimes adults have complicated feelings that are difficult to explain. Do you like my Papa?" "Of course I do. He's a good man and a wonderful father to you." "No, I mean, do you like him the way Mama did?" Eleanor opened her mouth to deflect, but Georgiana was looking at her with such earnest curiosity that she couldn't lie. "Your Grace, that's not something I can—" "You called me Your Grace. You only do that when you're upset. Usually you call me Georgiana or Dear Heart." The child was too clever by half. Eleanor set down her own embroidery and took Georgiana's hands. "I care for your father very much, but he was married to your mother, and she is the only Duchess of Blackmore that matters. I am your governess. That is my place, and I am content with it." Georgiana frowned, surprisingly mature for 9 years old. "But Mama is gone. Papa is alone. You're alone. Why can't people who are alone be together?" "Because the world doesn't work that way, sweet girl. Not for people like your father and me." Georgiana looked dissatisfied but dropped the subject, returning to her embroidery with unusual focus. Georgiana asked to visit her mother's grave. Eleanor and the Duke both accompanied her the first time the three of them had gone together. The family chapel was cold and grey, the November wind whistling through the eaves. Georgiana placed wildflowers she had picked from the conservatory on the simple headstone. "Catherine Harrow, Duchess of Blackmore, beloved wife and mother." "Hello, Mama," Georgiana said, her voice small but steady. "I'm eating again. Miss Westbrook helped me, and Papa is better too. He cries now, which he never did before. But Miss Westbrook says, that's good. I miss you every day. I love you." The Duke's voice was rough with emotion. "I'm trying to keep my promise, Catherine, to take care of our girl, to not forget how to live. It's harder than I thought, but I'm trying." Eleanor stood back, giving them privacy, but tears streamed down her face. The scene was too intimate, too painful, too beautiful. As they walked back to the house, Georgiana held both their hands, swinging between them like a bridge connecting two shores. They looked like a family. The realization struck both adults simultaneously. They glanced at each other over Georgiana's head, and the longing in that look was unmistakable, raw and honest, and utterly impossible. But neither spoke of it. That night, the Duke sat in his study, a glass of brandy untouched on the desk before him. The fire had burned down to embers, and the room was growing cold, but he didn't notice. He admitted to himself what he had been denying for weeks. He was in love with Eleanor Westbrook. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't convenience or loneliness or the need for companionship. It was love, real, deep, impossible love. He loved her wisdom, her strength, her gentleness. He loved the way she saw through his defenses, the way she challenged him to be better. He loved the way she loved his daughter, the way she had brought his household back from the edge of despair. But it had been only 2 months since Catherine's death. Society would be scandalized if he showed interest in another woman so soon, especially a governess. More than that, Eleanor had made it clear through her recent distance that she didn't welcome his attention. Perhaps she didn't feel the same, or perhaps she was simply more sensible than he was, understanding the impossibility of it all. He decided he must bury these feelings, must not burden her with them. Georgiana needed Eleanor. That was more important than anything his foolish heart might want. He finished the brandy in one burning swallow and went to bed, knowing sleep would not come easily. Late that night, Eleanor sat at the small desk in her room, a candle guttering beside her, and wrote a letter she would never send. Dear Mother, I find myself in an impossible situation. I have fallen in love with a man I can never have. He is kind and good, but he is also a duke, and I am only a governess. Worse still, his daughter has become dear to me, as dear as if she were my own. If I pursue my feelings, I risk everything. My position, my relationship with Georgiana, the fragile peace we've built in this house. But if I suppress them, I fear I will spend the rest of my life wondering, what if? What would you tell me, Mama? You always had wisdom for impossible situations. You would know what to do. But you are not here, and I must navigate this alone. I am so tired of being alone. She set down the pen, her hand trembling slightly. She folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others' years of unsent letters to her dead mother, a one-sided conversation spanning 17 years. Then she blew out the candle and lay in the darkness, listening to the wind rattle the windows, knowing that sleep would be a long time coming. In his own chambers, the Duke lay awake as well, staring at the ceiling, thinking of auburn hair and hazel eyes and a love he could never claim. And in the nursery, Georgiana slept peacefully for the first time in 2 months, dreaming of spring roses and her mother's smile. Chapter 7. Confession and Consequence. The first week of December brought a change to Blackmore Castle. Eleanor had suggested gently, carefully, that perhaps a small Christmas celebration might be healing for Georgiana. The Duke had been reluctant at first. It would be their first Christmas without Catherine, and the thought of celebrating felt wrong, almost blasphemous. But Georgiana had lit up at the idea. Mama loved Christmas, she said, her pale blue eyes bright for the first time in months. She'd want us to celebrate. She always said Christmas was for hope. So preparations began. A modest fir tree appeared in the drawing room, filling the air with the scent of evergreen. Garlands wound up the banister. The smell of gingerbread drifted from the kitchen, where cook worked with renewed enthusiasm. The household staff moved through their tasks with quiet joy, glad to see their home coming back to life. Georgiana was eating normally now. She had regained much of her strength, though she remained thinner than before, more fragile. But she was alive in a way she hadn't been a month ago. The hollowness had left her eyes, replaced by a tentative curiosity about the world. One evening at dinner, now a family affair with Eleanor joining them, Georgiana ate a second helping of roast chicken and asked for pudding. The Duke and Eleanor exchanged a look across the table, a moment of shared triumph and profound relief. After Georgiana had been put to bed, the Duke found Eleanor in the hallway. Miss Westbrook, would you join me for sherry in the drawing room? I would like to speak with you. Eleanor hesitated. Propriety dictated she should refuse, but something in his expression, a vulnerability she had rarely seen, made her agree. Of course, Your Grace. They sat by the fire, sherry glasses in hand, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The Duke was uncharacteristically nervous, his fingers drumming against his glass. He began formally, as if he'd rehearsed the words. Miss Westbrook, I wanted to thank you, properly, for everything you've done for Georgiana, for this household, for me. You've thanked me many times, Your Grace. It's not necessary. Please call me Thomas, at least when we're alone. Eleanor's pulse quickened. This was dangerous territory. I'm not sure that would be appropriate. Appropriate. He repeated the word with a bitter laugh. I've spent my entire life doing what's appropriate, following the rules, being proper, and where has it gotten me? I nearly lost my daughter because I was too appropriate to show grief. Eleanor sensed where this was going and tried to redirect. Your Grace, You're overwrought. The Christmas preparations, the memories. I'm not overwrought. I'm honest. For the first time in months, I'm being completely honest. He set down his glass and leaned forward, his grey eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Eleanor, I need to tell you something, and I ask that you hear me out before you respond. The confession. When you first came to Blackmore, I saw you only as someone who might help my daughter. You were a means to an end, but over these past weeks, I've come to see you as so much more. Eleanor's hands tightened on her glass. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The Duke continued, his voice low and urgent. You are the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Your strength, your compassion, your wisdom, you've brought my daughter back from the edge of death. You've taught me how to feel again, how to be a father again. But more than that, he paused, struggling for words, then pressed forward. I find myself thinking of you constantly. When I wake, when I work, when I lie down to sleep. I admire you. I respect you. Eleanor, I've fallen in love with you. The words hung in the air between them like smoke, impossible to take back. Eleanor sat frozen, her worst fear confirmed. The Duke watched her face anxiously. Please, say something. Eleanor's response. Eleanor set down her glass with trembling hands. Your Grace. Thomas, please. I cannot call you Thomas, because to do so would be to forget who I am and who you are. I am your employee. You are a duke. The gulf between us is insurmountable. Love doesn't care about station, but society does. Eleanor stood abruptly, needing distance. Your Grace, I am honored, truly honored, by your feelings, but I cannot reciprocate them. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Her voice betrayed her, shaking with suppressed emotion. The Duke stood as well, beginning to pace. Eleanor, I know it's complicated. I know it's soon after Catherine's death. I know society would gossip, but I don't care. But you should care, and I care, not for myself, but for Georgiana. Eleanor faced him, her hands clenched at her sides. Your Grace, that child has just begun to heal. She needs stability. She needs normalcy, if there were to be any. Romantic entanglement between us. It would disrupt everything we've built. More than that, she continued, her voice breaking. You are still grieving your wife. What you feel for me, I believe it's gratitude, companionship in sorrow, the comfort of someone who understands your pain. But it's not love. Not really. You've confused the two. The Duke looked stricken. You think I don't know my own heart? I think grief plays tricks on us. I think when we're drowning, we reach for the nearest lifeline and mistake it for salvation. That's not what this is. Your Grace, I must be blunt. Eleanor's voice was steady now, though tears threatened. Even if your feelings were genuine, even if mine were similar, I could never act on them. My duty is to Georgiana. She has lost her mother. If she were to lose me as well because of a scandal or an improper relationship, it would destroy her. The Duke was silent for a long moment, his shoulders sagging. Finally, he asked quietly, Are you saying your feelings are similar? Eleanor's facade cracked. What I feel is irrelevant. I am Georgiana's governess. That is my role, and I will not compromise it. Eleanor, I think I should retire for the evening, Your Grace. Thank you for the sherry. She fled the room before her resolve could break, before she could tell him the truth, that she loved him, desperately, hopelessly, impossibly. The next few days were strained. The Duke and Eleanor avoided being alone together. At meals with Georgiana, they were painfully, formally polite. The warmth that had grown between them was replaced by careful distance. Georgiana noticed immediately. Why are you and Papa being strange again? Eleanor deflected. We're not being strange, dear heart. But the child was not fooled. She watched them with worried eyes, her small face troubled. The Duke threw himself into estate business, spending long hours in his study poring over ledgers and correspondence. Eleanor spent more time in the nursery, reading with Georgiana, teaching her French and arithmetic, maintaining normalcy. But at night, alone in her room, Eleanor allowed herself to cry. Because she had lied, she did love him, desperately. But love wasn't always enough. Georgiana, frustrated by the tension, confronted her father in his study. Papa, did you and Miss Westbrook have a row? The Duke looked up from his papers, startled. A row? No, darling. Why would you think that? Because you're both miserable, and you won't look at each other, and she cries at night. I can hear her through the wall. The Duke's heart contracted painfully. She cries? Every night. Did you hurt her feelings? I may have. Not intentionally. Georgiana studied him with eyes far too old for 9 years. Do you love her, Papa? He could lie, should lie, but he was done with lying. Yes, I do. Does she love you? I don't know. She says she doesn't. She's fibbing, I can tell. She looks at you the way you look at her when you think no one's watching. The Duke sat down heavily. Georgiana, it's complicated. I'm a duke. She's a governess. The world doesn't approve of such things. Mama used to say that the world's approval isn't worth having if it costs you your happiness. Her father smiled sadly. Your mother was always wiser than me. Then why don't you fight for Miss Westbrook? Mama would have fought. Because Miss Westbrook is right. She's your governess. If anything were to happen between us, it might mean she'd have to leave. And you need her. Georgiana considered this seriously. I do need her. But Papa, I need you to be happy too. And you're not happy. You're just less sad. That's not the same. That evening, the Duke asked to speak with Eleanor again. She came reluctantly to his study, her face guarded. Eleanor, I owe you an apology. I put you in an impossible position. I allowed my feelings to override my judgment. You were right about everything. My duty is to Georgiana, and so is yours. I won't complicate that anymore. Eleanor felt relief and heartbreak in equal measure. Thank you, Your Grace, but I want you to know something. His voice was raw with emotion. What I feel for you is not confusion. It's not grief seeking comfort. It's love. Real love. But I understand that love doesn't always mean we can be together. Some loves are meant to teach us, not possess us. He was echoing her own words back to her. I will not speak of this again. We will go back to being employer and employee. But I needed you to know. You are loved. Truly. Even if I can never say it aloud again after tonight. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Your Grace, Thomas. I need you to know that you are loved as well. More than is wise. More than is appropriate. But I do love you. I always will. But Georgiana, I know. She comes first. For both of us. They stood there, two people in love who would never be together, acknowledging the impossible. Then something shifted. The Duke stepped closer. One thing. Just once. So we know it's real. Eleanor knew she should refuse, should maintain the boundary. But she didn't. He cupped her face gently with both hands, his touch achingly tender. He leaned down and kissed her softly, briefly, full of longing and goodbye. When they parted, both had tears on their faces. We can never do that again, Eleanor whispered. I know, but I'll remember it, forever, as will I. She left, and this time, it felt final. Eleanor returned to her room, touched her lips where he had kissed her, and allowed herself one night to grieve what could never be. Tomorrow, she would go back to being Miss Westbrook, governess. Tonight, she was a woman who loved and was loved in return, even if that love could never see daylight. The Duke sat alone in his study, the ghost of her touch still on his skin. He looked at Catherine's portrait above the fireplace and whispered into the silence. I loved you, Catherine. I will always love you. But my heart is large enough to hold 2 women. Is that allowed? Can I love you both? There was no answer. But somehow, in the quiet of the night, he felt a sense of peace, as if Catherine, wherever she was, understood. Chapter 8. The Duke's Unraveling. 8 days had passed since the kiss. 8 days of careful politeness, of avoiding each other's eyes, of maintaining the fiction that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The air between Eleanor and the Duke was charged with what could not be said, what could not be acted upon. Christmas was approaching, and Eleanor had focused all her energy on making it special for Georgiana, decorating the tree, planning a modest celebration, teaching the child Christmas carols in her clear, slightly off-key voice. Georgiana was thriving, eating well, laughing, engaging with life. It should be enough. It was enough. It had to be enough. The house was decorated modestly but beautifully. Evergreen garlands wound through the banisters, filling the air with the scent of pine and winter. In the drawing room, Georgiana helped Eleanor make paper garlands, her small hands working carefully to fold and cut the shapes. Mama and I used to do this, Georgiana said, but her voice was wistful rather than devastated. She'd make a mess of it and laugh. She was better at grand things than small, detailed things. Eleanor smiled. What grand things did she do? She threw wonderful parties. The whole county would come. and she could ride a horse better than any man. She'd jump fences that made the grooms nervous. And she once stood up to a horrible magistrate who was being cruel to a tenant family. Papa said she was magnificently terrifying when she was angry about injustice. Eleanor treasured these memories, storing them away, building a fuller picture of the woman she had never met but felt she knew. The Duke appeared in the doorway, watching them work. "Your mother was indeed magnificent," he said quietly. "She would be so proud of you, Georgiana." The child dropped her garland and ran to hug her father. Eleanor slipped away, giving them privacy. But as she left, her eyes met the Duke's, and the longing in that glance was palpable, a physical ache that stretched between them like a thread pulled taut. Christmas Eve dawned cold and clear. They attended church in the morning, Georgiana's first time leaving the estate since her mother's death. The girl held Eleanor's hand on one side, her father's on the other, forming a chain of three. During the service, when the congregation sang "Silent Night," Georgiana's voice broke on the words, but she continued singing, her small voice brave and true. After church, they visited Catherine's grave. The family chapel was cold, their breath misting in the air. Georgiana had brought a small wreath of holly, bright red berries against dark green leaves. "Merry Christmas, Mama," she said, placing it carefully on the headstone. "I miss you, but I'm all right now. Miss Westbrook helped me, and Papa is trying too." The Duke's voice was rough. "We're moving forward, my love, as you would have wanted. But we haven't forgotten you. We never will." Eleanor stood back, respecting their private grief. But Georgiana turned and called to her. "Miss Westbrook, come stand with us. You're part of our family." The words pierced Eleanor's heart like an arrow. She joined them, and the three stood in silence at Catherine's grave, a family bound by love and loss, by grief shared and healing begun. They returned home for Christmas Eve dinner. Cook had prepared a feast: roast goose with chestnut stuffing, roasted potatoes, glazed carrots, and plum pudding soaked in brandy. Georgiana ate heartily, chattering about Christmas memories, the year it snowed so much they couldn't get to church, the year Mama received a puppy as a gift, and it ate half the Christmas pudding. The Duke smiled at his daughter's stories, but Eleanor noticed a distance in his grey eyes, a preoccupation he couldn't quite hide. After dinner, they adjourned to the drawing room for presents. Georgiana gave her father a drawing she had made, the three of them in the rose garden, surrounded by blooming flowers. The Duke's hands trembled as he held it. "It's beautiful, darling. I drew Miss Westbrook too because she's part of us now." The Duke's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, she is." Georgiana gave Eleanor a pressed flower bookmark she had made, with a note in careful handwriting. "For all the stories you've read me, thank you for saving my life." Eleanor had to excuse herself briefly to compose herself, pressing the bookmark to her heart. The Duke had prepared gifts as well, a beautiful leather-bound edition of poetry for Eleanor, illustrated with engravings. For Georgiana, a new doll, one that didn't look like her mother, a doll for the future, not the past. Then Georgiana presented Eleanor with something unexpected, a small portrait miniature of Catherine, no larger than Eleanor's palm. It showed a dark-haired woman with laughing eyes and a warm smile. "Mrs. Pembroke helped me find it," Georgiana explained. "I want you to have it, so you can remember her too. You talk about her like you knew her, and I think she would have liked you very much." Eleanor accepted it with trembling hands, overcome by the gift's intimacy and trust. December 24th, late evening. After Georgiana was put to bed, Eleanor intended to retire immediately. But she found she could not sleep. Restless, she went down to the library to find a book. The Duke was there, sitting in the dark, staring into the dying embers of the fire. He didn't notice her at first. Eleanor hesitated, should leave, but something in his posture stopped her, the slump of his shoulders, the way his head was bowed. "Your Grace, are you all right?" He looked up, and she saw his face was wet with tears. "Eleanor," he said, his voice broken, "I cannot do this anymore." Eleanor crossed to him quickly. "What do you mean?" "This. Pretending, being strong, being proper. I am falling apart, Eleanor." He stood abruptly and began to pace, words tumbling out in a rush. "It's been 2 months since Catherine died, and I haven't properly grieved her. Not really. I've been so focused on Georgiana, on you, on managing the estate, that I haven't let myself truly feel her loss. And then tonight at her grave, I realized something terrible. I feel guilty." "Guilty about what?" "About loving you." His voice cracked like breaking glass. "I love my wife. I will always love Catherine. But I also love you, and the guilt of that is crushing me. How can I love you when she's barely cold in the ground? What kind of man does that make me?" Eleanor's heart broke for him. "Thomas, and more than that," he continued, the words pouring out like a flood. "I'm angry at Catherine for dying, furious. She left me. She left Georgiana. She promised we'd grow old together, and she broke that promise. And I hate myself for being angry at a dead woman who had no choice in the matter." He was weeping openly now, all pretense of ducal composure shattered. "I've failed everyone. I failed Catherine by not being enough to make her want to fight to live. I failed Georgiana by being emotionally absent. I failed you by putting you in an impossible position. I'm a disaster of a man masquerading as a duke." Eleanor went to him and took his hands firmly. "Thomas, listen to me. You haven't failed anyone. You are grieving. You are human. You are allowed to feel all of these contradictory things at once. But the anger is normal. I was angry at my mother for years after she died, angry that she left me, angry that she wasn't stronger, angry at heaven for taking her. Anger is a part of grief. It doesn't mean you didn't love her. And the guilt about loving you?" Eleanor chose her words carefully. "Love is not a finite resource. Loving me doesn't mean you love Catherine less. The human heart is vast. It can hold multiple loves without diminishing any of them. Catherine would not want you to be alone forever. How do you know? Because she loved you. Because she loved Georgiana. And people who love don't want their beloveds to suffer endlessly." The Duke collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands, sobbing with great, wrenching sounds. Eleanor knelt beside him and held him as she had held his daughter, as she had held Georgiana through her own breaking. She let him cry, let him release 2 months of suppressed agony. His grief poured out for his wife, for his daughter's pain, for his own loneliness, for the impossible situation with Eleanor. She stroked his hair, murmured comfort, bore witness to his unraveling. It lasted a long time. Finally, he quieted and lifted his head. His eyes were red and swollen, his face blotched with tears, and he looked more real, more human than he had since she met him. "Thank you," he whispered. "You don't need to thank me." "I do. You've held this entire household together. But who holds you?" Eleanor's own tears started then. "I hold myself. I learned how, a long time ago." "That's not fair. You shouldn't have to." "Life rarely is fair, Thomas." They sat together in the quiet, exhausted and raw. After a long silence, the Duke spoke. "I need to be honest with you about something." "What?" "I said last week that what I feel for you is love, not just grief seeking comfort. You suggested I was confused. But Eleanor, I'm not confused. Not anymore. I love Catherine. I will always love her. But I also love you. Both things are true. And I'm not asking you to be with me. I know that's impossible. I just need you to believe me, that this is real." Eleanor wiped her eyes. "I believe you, because I feel the same. I love you, truly. Not because you're grieving or because you need me, but because of who you are. Your kindness to your daughter, your willingness to be vulnerable, your determination to do right by everyone, even when it costs you. I love you. Then why can't we? Because Georgiana needs stability more than we need each other. Because society would destroy us both. Because I won't risk hurting that child, not after everything she's been through. Because some loves are meant to transform us, not to be consummated." The Duke nodded slowly. "I understand. I don't like it, but I understand." "Will you do something for me?" he asked after a moment. "What? Will you stay? Not as a governess necessarily, but as part of this family. Georgiana needs you. I need you, even if only as a friend. Please don't leave us." Eleanor considered. It would be painful, loving him and not being able to be with him. But the alternative was worse. "I'll stay, for as long as you'll have me." "Thank you." They talked through the night about Catherine, about grief, about the future. The Duke shared memories he had kept locked away. Catherine's laugh, her terrible attempts at cooking, the way she sang off-key but with such joy that no one minded. Toward dawn, he said, "I'm ready to grieve properly now. Will you help me?" "Of course. What do you need?" "I need to go through Catherine's things. I've been avoiding it. But I think it's time." "I'll be here," Eleanor promised. As dawn broke on Christmas morning, the Duke and Eleanor stood together at the library window, watching the sun rise over the frost-covered grounds of Blackmore, painting the world in shades of pink and gold. Merry Christmas, Eleanor. Merry Christmas, Thomas. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. The understanding between them was complete. Upstairs, Georgiana woke to Christmas morning. She stretched, smiled, and thought, "Mama, I think everything is going to be all right. We're broken, but we're healing. And Miss Westbrook is here. She loves us, and we love her. It's different from when you were alive, but it's good. I hope you're not sad that we're learning to be happy again." And somehow, in the winter light streaming through her window, Georgiana felt her mother's blessing. Chapter 9. The Impossible Made Possible. Georgiana woke to snow falling softly outside her window. Christmas! She leaped out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold floor, and pulled on her dressing gown. She ran down the hallway, her heart light with excitement, and paused outside Miss Westbrook's door. She knocked eagerly, bouncing on her toes. "Miss Westbrook, it's Christmas, it's snowing. Wake up." The door opened almost immediately. Eleanor stood there, smiling despite the shadows under her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. Her auburn hair was loose around her shoulders, and she looked younger, softer, more vulnerable than usual. "Merry Christmas, dear heart. Come on, we have to wake Papa." Together they hurried down the corridor to the Duke's chambers, something that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago, but which now felt natural. Georgiana knocked loudly. "Papa, Papa, it's Christmas." The Duke opened the door. He was already dressed, though his cravat was loose and his hair slightly disheveled. He looked tired but peaceful, and when he saw his daughter's joy, his face lit up with a smile that reached his eyes. "Merry Christmas, my darling girl. Merry Christmas, Papa. Merry Christmas, Miss Westbrook. Can we open presents now? Can we? Please." The Duke laughed a real, genuine laugh that rumbled from deep in his chest. "After breakfast, I believe Cook has prepared something special." Breakfast was indeed a feast. Fresh bread still warm from the oven, scrambled eggs with cream, bacon crisp to perfection, porridge with honey and cinnamon, and apple tarts glazed with sugar. Georgiana ate heartily, chattering constantly about the snow, about presents, about everything and nothing. She had gained back all the weight she had lost and more. Her cheeks were pink and healthy, her eyes bright with life. She was still quieter than she had been before her mother's death, more thoughtful, but she was whole. The Duke and Eleanor exchanged glances over her head relief, pride, and a love that was no longer romantic longing but something deeper, more familial. The love of people who had survived something terrible together and emerged, changed. Christmas Day. They opened presents by the fire in the drawing room. The tree sparkled with candles and paper ornaments, filling the room with the scent of pine and beeswax. Georgiana presented her father with the drawing she had made, the three of them, in the rose garden, surrounded by flowers. He held it with trembling hands, deeply moved. "It's beautiful, darling." She gave Eleanor the pressed flower bookmark with its careful note of thanks. Eleanor had to excuse herself briefly, pressing the bookmark to her heart as tears threatened to overwhelm her. But the Duke had prepared something special for Georgiana. He presented her with a small velvet box. Inside was a gold locket on a delicate chain. He opened it to show her the miniature portrait inside Catherine, smiling, forever young. "So you can keep Mama close to your heart," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "And when you're ready, you can add someone else you love on the other side." Georgiana threw her arms around him, weeping happy tears. "Thank you, Papa. Thank you." Later, when Georgiana was occupied with her new doll, Eleanor asked quietly, "What will you do with Catherine's belongings?" The Duke looked at her, and something had shifted in his grey eyes. "I've begun sorting through them. Some I'll keep, some I'll give to Georgiana when she's older, some I'll let go of. It's time." They spent Christmas Day quietly. They walked in the snow, Georgiana shrieking with delight as she caught snowflakes on her tongue. They read by the fire, taking turns with a book of fairy tales. They played charades, and Georgiana laughed until her sides hurt. In the evening, as the candles were lit against the darkness, Georgiana said thoughtfully, "This was a good Christmas. Different from before, but good. I think Mama would be glad we're not too sad anymore." The Duke pulled her close. "I think you're right, darling." It was a golden June afternoon, and Eleanor walked through the rose garden with Georgiana. The roses were in full, glorious bloom, red as rubies, pink as dawn, white as snow, yellow as sunshine. Their scent was intoxicating, heavy and sweet on the warm air. Georgiana, now 9 years old, was transformed. She was taller, Her limbs no longer stick thin but growing strong. She was full of life and curiosity, asking endless questions about everything she saw. She was not the same child she had been before her mother's death. She was quieter, more thoughtful, with a maturity beyond her years, but she was whole. She laughed and ran ahead through the garden, her blonde hair streaming behind her. She called back, "Miss Westbrook, look, the roses Mama planted are blooming. Aren't they beautiful?" Eleanor followed, her heart full. She had been at Blackmore for 8 months now, and it felt like home in a way nowhere ever had. Not the vicarage of her childhood, not her aunt's school, not any of the 4 houses where she had served as governess. Here she belonged. The Duke joined them in the garden. Georgiana ran to him, and he caught her up, swinging her around as she squealed with delight. "Papa, the garden is beautiful, just like Mama said it would be." He set her down and knelt to her level. "Yes, it is. Your mother had wonderful vision." He had changed too over these months. The rigid austerity had softened. He smiled more easily, laughed more often. He spoke of Catherine regularly, but without the crushing weight of fresh grief. He had learned to grieve and to live simultaneously, to hold both sorrow and joy in his heart at once. Eleanor watched father and daughter together, and there was a pang in her chest. She loved them both so much, but the situation remained impossible. Nothing had changed the fundamental facts. She was a governess, he was a duke, and society would never accept their union. As they walked through the roses, Georgiana asked suddenly, "Miss Westbrook, will you stay with us forever?" Eleanor was caught off guard. "What do you mean, dear heart?" "I mean, will you always be my governess? Or will you leave someday?" "Do you want me to leave?" "No, never. I want you to stay always, you and Papa and me, together, like a family." Eleanor's heart clenched. She knelt in the grass, taking Georgiana's hands. "Georgiana, I am your governess. That's my role. But you're more than that. You're like, I don't know, you're like a second mother to me. Not replacing. Mama, no one could do that. But loving me in a different way. I do love you, very much. You are as dear to me as if you were my own daughter. Then why can't you be part of our family? Really part of it?" The Duke, who had been listening, intervened gently. "Georgiana, it's complicated. Why? Because she's a governess and you're a duke? That's silly. Mama used to say that love matters more than station. Your mother was right, but the world doesn't always agree with what's right." Georgiana looked between them with her unnervingly perceptive eyes. "You love each other. I know you do. I see it. So why can't you be together?" The Duke and Eleanor were silent for a long moment. Finally, Eleanor said carefully, "Georgiana, sometimes adults have to make choices based on what's best for everyone, not just what they want. But wouldn't it be best for everyone if we were all together, as a real family?" The Duke spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "Georgiana, I loved your mother very much. I will always love her. But you're right, I do love Miss Westbrook as well. However, society has rules about these things. It hasn't even been a year since your mother died. If I were to court Miss Westbrook, people would talk. They would say terrible things. It might hurt you, hurt her, hurt our family's reputation." Georgiana considered this seriously. "I don't care what people say. That's because you're 9. But words can wound, and I won't subject either of you to that." Eleanor added, "And Georgiana, I'm your governess. That relationship is precious to me. If your father and I were to pursue anything else, it might change that dynamic. I might have to leave this position, and I don't want to leave you." "Then don't leave. Stay as my governess and be with Papa." The simplicity of a child's logic stood in stark contrast to the complexity of adult reality. The Duke suggested they visit Catherine's grave together. It had become a regular ritual. Once a month, they went as a family to tend the flowers and speak to her memory. At the gravestone, now softened with moss and surrounded by wildflowers that had seeded themselves, they stood in comfortable silence. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces. Georgiana placed fresh roses on the grave, pink ones, her mother's favorite. "Hello, Mama, we miss you. The roses are beautiful this year. You'd love them." The Duke added, "Catherine, I've been thinking about the future, about what you'd want for Georgiana, for me. I think you'd want us to be happy, to move forward. But I'm not certain how to do that while still honoring your memory." Eleanor stood slightly apart, respecting their private communion, but Georgiana turned and pulled her closer. "Miss Westbrook should be here too. She's part of us." Eleanor, with tears in her eyes, spoke to the headstone for the first time. "Duchess, I never knew you, but I feel I've come to know you through your daughter and husband. You raised a remarkable child. You loved a good man, and I promise you, I will spend my life helping to care for them both, in whatever capacity I'm allowed." A breeze stirred the roses, carrying their scent across the churchyard. Somehow, impossibly, it felt like an answer, like a blessing. As they walked back to the house, Georgiana running ahead to chase butterflies in the meadow, the Duke said quietly to Eleanor, "I've been thinking." About what Georgiana said, about the future, about us. Eleanor's heart began to pound. "Thomas, I know we agreed it was impossible, but what if it's not? What if we waited a proper mourning period, say, a full year from Catherine's death, and then, quietly, began a courtship? I could offer you a position as Georgiana's companion rather than governess. We could take our time, move slowly, give society nothing to gossip about." Eleanor wanted to say yes so badly it hurt. But fear held her back. And what happens when society does gossip? When they call me a fortune hunter, a woman who took advantage of a grieving widower? Let them talk. His voice was fierce. I don't care about their opinions anymore. I care about my daughter's happiness, my own happiness, your happiness. The three of us deserve a chance at a future together. Eleanor stopped walking and faced him. Are you certain, truly certain? Because if we pursue this, and it fails, Georgiana will be hurt. I will be hurt. You will be hurt. I'm certain. I've spent 6 months thinking about nothing else. I love you, Eleanor. Not as a substitute for Catherine, not as a convenient solution, but as yourself. I want to build a life with you, if you'll have me. Eleanor looked ahead at Georgiana, who was picking wildflowers in the meadow, her blonde hair bright in the sun. She thought about the past 8 months, about the family they had become, about the love that had grown despite every obstacle. I need time to think about this. It's not a simple decision. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. That evening, as Eleanor put Georgiana to bed, the child said, Miss Westbrook, can I tell you something? Of course. Mama came to me in a dream last night. Eleanor stilled, her hand pausing in its gentle stroke through Georgiana's hair. Did she? Yes. She said she's happy. She said she's not in pain anymore. And she said she wants us to be happy too. All of us. She said love is the most important thing, and we shouldn't waste it because we're afraid. Eleanor didn't know if the dream was real or a child's wishful thinking, a way of making sense of complicated adult emotions. But it didn't matter. What do you think your mother would want for your father? For you? Georgiana didn't hesitate. She'd want us to love each other. She'd want Papa to find happiness again. She'd want me to have someone who loves me like a mother, even if she's not my real mother. And I think she'd like you very much, Miss Westbrook. I think you two would have been friends. Eleanor kissed Georgiana's forehead, her eyes stinging with tears. I think so too, dear heart. Eleanor's decision. That night, Eleanor sat at her desk by candlelight and wrote a letter. Not to her dead mother this time, but to the Duke. Your Grace, you asked me to think about the future, and I have. For months, I've been thinking about nothing else. I told you that some loves are meant to transform us, not to be consummated. I believed that when I said it. But I've come to realize something. Our love has already transformed all of us. Georgiana is whole again. You have learned to grieve and to live simultaneously. I have found a family, and perhaps that transformation makes a future possible that I thought was impossible. I cannot promise it will be easy. Society will judge us. People will talk. But I hope that love is stronger than judgment, that the family we've built matters more than the opinions of strangers. So yes, I will wait with you for a proper mourning period. Yes, I will consider a courtship, slow and respectful. Yes, I will take a chance on a future with you and Georgiana, because you were right. We deserve happiness. All three of us. Catherine would want that. I'm certain of it. Yours, with love and hope, Eleanor. She folded the letter with trembling hands and slipped it under his door before she could lose her nerve. Then she returned to her room and waited for dawn, her heart full of hope and fear in equal measure. It was Christmas again, a full year after Eleanor's arrival at Blackmore Castle. The house was decorated more elaborately this time, Georgiana had insisted, and the Duke had agreed. Garlands hung from every banister, candles glowed in every window, and the tree in the drawing room was magnificent. The Duke had formally changed Eleanor's position from governess to companion to Lady Georgiana. In society's eyes, it was a promotion that gave her more status, more independence. In reality, it was a step toward a future together. They hadn't announced any courtship, it was too soon, too delicate. But the household staff knew, and they approved wholeheartedly. Mrs. Pembroke had said privately to Eleanor, "The Duchess would be glad. She'd want you all to be happy." Christmas afternoon, the three of them walked through the rose garden, now covered in pristine snow. Georgiana ran ahead, making snow angels and shrieking with laughter. The Duke and Eleanor walked side by side, not touching propriety still mattered, but close enough that their breath mingled in the cold air. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "Yes. Are you?" "Yes. For the first time in a year, I'm truly happy. Not just content, not just surviving. Happy. I worried that I could never make you happy. That you'd always compare me to Catherine." He stopped and turned to face her. "Eleanor, you are not a replacement for Catherine. You're your own person, with your own strengths, your own way of loving. I don't compare you because you're incomparable. Do I still love Catherine? Yes, I always will. But my heart is large enough for both of you. You taught me that," Georgiana called from ahead. "Are you two coming? I want to build a snowman." They hurried to join her, and together the three of them built a snowman in the rose garden where Catherine had once worked. Georgiana insisted on giving it a carrot nose and coal eyes, making it look delightfully ridiculous. They laughed together, free, genuine laughter that echoed across the snow-covered grounds. The Duke looked at his daughter, rosy-cheeked and joyful, and then at Eleanor, smiling and covered in snow, and his heart felt full to bursting. "This," he said, "this is what I want, every day, for the rest of our lives." Eleanor met his eyes. "Then that's what we'll build, together." That evening, after Georgiana was asleep, the Duke and Eleanor sat by the fire in his study. The flames danced and crackled, casting warm light across their faces. He took her hand, a small gesture, but significant. The first time he had touched her since the kiss 6 months ago. "I want to make this official. When the mourning period is complete in October, I want to court you properly, with society's knowledge. And eventually, if you'll have me, I want to marry you." Eleanor's breath caught. "Thomas, I know it's complicated. I know there will be gossip, but I don't care. Georgiana needs you. I need you. We're a family already. Let's make it official. What about your title? Your position? A duke marrying a governess will cause scandal." "Let it." His voice was fierce. "My wife was the daughter of an earl, and our marriage was considered perfect by society's standards. But you know what? The happiness I found with you is deeper than anything I had before. Not because Catherine wasn't wonderful, she was, but because I'm a different man now, a better man, and you made that possible." Eleanor thought of all the reasons to say no, the scandal, the judgment, the risk. But then she thought of Georgiana's smile, of the life they had built, of the love that had grown in the ruins of grief. "Ask me again in 6 months, when the mourning period is complete, and if you still feel the same, then yes, I'll marry you." He smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had been given a second chance at life. "I'll ask you every day for 6 months if you'd like. Once will suffice, Your Grace." "Thomas, please, always Thomas." "Thomas," she agreed, and his name on her lips felt like a promise, like a vow, like the beginning of something new. Eleanor stood in the rose garden in a simple ivory dress, no elaborate train or veil, just clean lines and honest beauty. Georgiana, now 10 years old, was her flower girl, beaming with joy and carrying a basket of rose petals. It was a small gathering household staff, close family friends, the vicar from the village church. No grand society wedding. They had chosen intimacy over spectacle, love over display. The Duke waited for her at the garden arch, standing among the blooming roses that Catherine had planted years ago. He was handsome in his dark coat, his grey eyes bright with emotion. As Eleanor walked toward him, she looked up at the sky. A cloud passed, and for a moment, brilliant sunlight broke through, illuminating everything in gold. She thought, "Thank you, Catherine, for your daughter, for your husband, for teaching them how to love. I'll take care of them, I promise." The ceremony was brief and heartfelt. When the vicar said, "You may kiss your bride," the Duke leaned down and whispered first, "I love you. I love you too." The kiss was tender, witnessed by the people who mattered most. Georgiana threw rose petals with wild abandon and cheered loudly enough to startle the birds from the trees. That evening, the three of them, now officially a family, stood at Catherine's grave in the fading light. Eleanor placed her bridal bouquet on the headstone, white roses mixed with pink. Georgiana spoke first. "Mama, Papa married Miss Westbrook today. She's Eleanor now, the Duchess of Blackmore. I get to call her mother if I want to, though I'll always call you Mama in my heart. I hope you're not sad. I hope you're happy for us." The Duke added, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Catherine, for everything, for Georgiana, for teaching me to love, for letting me go so I could love again. I'll never forget you. We'll never forget you." Eleanor spoke last, her hand resting on the cool stone. "I promise to honor your memory by loving them both with everything I have. You gave them roots. I'll help them grow wings. Thank you for your blessing." They stood together in the fading light, and the roses bloomed around them in glorious profusion, red for love, white for remembrance, pink for new beginnings. Lady Georgiana Harrow had not eaten for 2 weeks. She had been dying, slowly, from a grief too large for a child's heart to hold. But Eleanor Westbrook had done the impossible. She had taught a grieving child that life, even life without a mother, was still worth living. She had taught a broken man that his heart could hold two loves without betraying either. She had taken a house full of ghosts and filled it with breath and warmth and hope. And in doing so, she had saved not just one life, but 3, the child's, the father's, and her own. The impossible had become possible. Not through magic, not through miracles, but through patience, compassion, honesty, and love. Through the willingness to sit with pain instead of running from it. Through the courage to hope when hope seemed foolish. Through the understanding that grief and joy can coexist, that honoring the past and embracing the future are not mutually exclusive, that families can be rebuilt from broken pieces and emerge stronger for having been shattered. As the stars emerged over Blackmore Castle that night, 3 people stood together in a rose garden, their hands linked, their hearts healing, their future bright with promise. The Duchess of Blackmore slept peacefully in her grave, her roses blooming eternal, her love living on in the daughter she had borne, the husband she had cherished, and the woman who had had the grace to love them both. And somewhere, in the space between earth and sky, between memory and hope, a woman's voice hummed a Cornish folk song, and the roses nodded in the evening breeze, as if to say, "Well done, all of you, well done." And so, Eleanor Westbrook did the impossible. She saved a child, healed a broken man, and found the family she'd been searching for all her life. If this story touched your heart, I'd be so grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world and helps me bring you more stories of love, loss, and second chances. Drop a comment below and tell me, what moment in this story moved you the most? Was it Georgiana's first meal, the Duke's breakdown on Christmas Eve, or perhaps the moment Eleanor finally said yes? I love reading your thoughts, and I read every single comment. If you enjoyed this tale of hope and healing, you might love these other stories on the channel. The story of a widow who finds unexpected love with her late husband's best friend, or the governess who discovers she's heir to a fortune, but must choose between wealth and the family who needs her, or the tale of 2 sisters separated by tragedy and reunited by fate. Click on any of these to continue your journey into stories of the heart. Thank you for spending this time with Georgiana, Eleanor, and the Duke of Blackmore. Thank you for believing, as they did, that love can bloom even in the coldest winter, and that broken hearts can heal when held by gentle hands. Until our next story, may your own life be filled with second chances, unexpected blessings, and the courage to hope when hope seems impossible. This is Lyra's Romance Stories. I'll see you in the next tale.